So it's not only about the money, it's also about how are we dealing with such valuable information at this moment in time. And that when my wife was pregnant of our now 2-year-old daughter, we went to the hospital and they were doing kind of this early test to see whether the child had certain syndromes and whether the baby was healthy. And for that, they needed to use the genome. And then the nurse asked me, do you want to give us the sequence? Do you want the DNA data? Do you want to give it to charity? And she couldn't even tell me which charity. And of course, she didn't know I was involved with GenomesDAO. So I immediately said no. And she really looked at me. It's like, what kind of person are you? This is charity. We're doing hard work here. I said like, well, first of all, you can't tell me even what the name of the charity is. You're just trying to think like, because you say charity, that I just need to sign everything and wave the DNA data of my unborn daughter here. And second of all, I have no clue kind of in which database this goes.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
I'm excited today to have with us a project that I think has a lot of potential impact in the world and also is unique, I believe, in the DeFi space because it brings to all of us something that's a little more of a real world application, which is kind of one of my primary investment theses for my own investments is I want things that actually cross over between all of us who are hardcore DeFi and those in the rest of the world that aren't necessarily hardcore into crypto and DeFi. And I think there's a lot of opportunity with this project. So today I have Aldo De Pape and Mark Hahnel, sorry, I'm sort of pronouncing it in my head before I say it, and the famous Intern from GenomesDAO project. And Mark, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself and then Aldo and then Intern and give us your background, how you got into all of this, and then kind of give us an overview of the project and what it's going to do for people in their own genetic data, if you could.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for having us, Brad. So the first thing I'd like to say about GenomesDAO is that we've been going for over 3 years now. So we've been building this for a while. We went through the Consensus Accelerator back in 2019, but we can come back to all of these points in a little moment. But
that would be fascinating to hear.
Yeah. So I'm on the science side of the team. My background is I did a PhD in stem cell biology and genetics at Imperial College in London. And coming out of that, I started a company in the data publishing space. So this isn't my first rodeo or Aldo's first rodeo for that matter. But that is where I think the stem root cause of the problem came about. So I started a platform called Figshare. It's a data publishing platform that if you're an academic and you need to publish more than your papers, the data sets, the code, the videos, everything's becoming more computational, then it's a platform to do that. And if you got me 10 years ago, I'd say everyone should open everything and then we can move further, faster. If you just make everything available online, we can really move further, faster. And then you started seeing things, the European Commission actually has a really good term for this, which is as open as possible. as closed as necessary, because there's some data that shouldn't see the light of day. And the examples I often use are, if you're studying the location of a species that's been hunted to extinction, you probably shouldn't publish that data because they'll be dead by morning, right? So
Brutal.
and yeah, another side to that though that I saw was the first human genome got sequenced in 2001, cost $5 billion. And then in 2021, the cost is about $500 and it's going to go to zero. So what we're seeing is a lot more people getting their genome sequenced and not being aware that they shouldn't be sharing this data. And so that's really where it all started. It's your most personal information. It's in every cell in your body, and it knows more about you than you know about yourself. It tells you more than that your hair is blonde or your eyes are green, And so myself and Aldo had worked together back when I started Figshare. I hadn't had a business class, so I was given someone with MBA experience from the VC side, and that was Mr. De Pape.
Nice.
He then went on to start his own company in the ed tech space that I'm sure he'll reference. He can talk about now. But that's when we started having the conversation about there's a problem here, and I think we can solve it. But I'll hand over to Aldo for an intro. Sorry.
Cool.
Yeah. So Mark and I, we were, working together, gearing up Figshare, which is the company he previously founded. And yeah, already then we were talking about DNA, and that's, I think, also the interesting part of it. As a non-scientist, you can very quickly can get behind it, right? Because it's so personal. It's something so close to you, and when you further examine it, you basically see it's the blueprint. That's always what we say. It's the blueprint to who you are. And you only have one of it. It's like in your lifetime, you're going to have multiple phone numbers, multiple home addresses, multiple cars, but you're only going to have one genomic sequence. And so you better be very cautious with it. And that's the thinking if you follow that logic. But then you look into, the real world and real world application, and you actually see the opposite. People are not very cautious with it.
That's right.
And so that was something that we found very funny, that if you kind of have a pub conversation or a personal conversation about DNA, people get very much into privacy. But then when you get into the practical spheres, people are like, oh, no, it's okay. And they very quickly forgive those people who say, well, I'm not going to use it completely, or I'm going to use it anonymized, or, kind of coming up with certain excuses. And then people just let it go. And one of the things we thought at that time is like, well, you can't really blame people, because there's really nothing else out there that shows actually the way how to do it. So why don't we start creating that? And that basically gave life to GenomesDAO. Now, when we started this conversation, I think technologically, a lot of things were still in its infancy. If we talk about, not only talk about genomic sequencing, which was done for the first time in 2000 at a cost of over 5 billion, really to really sequence the first human genome at a clinical level. The cost for that today is a little bit over $500, as Mark and Intern can also testify to. But also the things like, how to work with these massive data files. And then, of course, making sure it's all done in a proper way, in an auditable way, proving that you're only working with one version of the truth, which is where blockchain comes in, basically. So this, all our discussions that Mark, myself, but also the three other founders that were involved in the very beginning had, were all about, if only we could, if only this would exist and whatever, and then kind of open, blockchain, basically. And that basically opened an entire new world for us. Meanwhile, sorry, before I segue into more of my life story, meanwhile, I was building my edtech venture, which is all about helping teachers help resolve the problem of information abundance, more looking at artificial intelligence and curation and all those sorts of things. Very happy doing it, and also to a certain success. But Mark and I kept in contact, and I think we just went there and saw how far we could get it. And yeah, so that led us to where we're here today. I'm passing the torch now to Intern, because Intern came into our lives when we decided to adopt a little bit more of the DAO thinking, and that made it a lot more exciting than than it was before.
Yeah, thank you, Aldo. Yeah, so I guess a little bit of my background. I'm recently graduated. My undergraduate was degree was in biomedical engineering, and then I got another master's degree after that. And then during my undergrad, I actually worked in pharmacogenomics
Nice.
at one of the big companies that if I tell you, like immediate docs. But yeah, I worked there and I just, what pharmacogenomics is, just for your audience, is where you're looking at someone's genetics and seeing how your genetics impact how someone metabolizes a drug. So for example, like if I'm taking like an opioid or something, how my genetics would need me to either take a lower dose or maybe a higher dose to get the same efficacy. So I had, some background in genomics, and then also I was always interested in like crypto, right? A little bit. And the GenomesDAO account on Twitter actually followed me. And I was like, wait a minute, what's this? And I dug deeper, and I was lucky enough to find them when they were pretty early. And I was like, wow, this is very compelling. So then I hopped on. So I'm a bit newer to the team, but yeah.
Obviously, you had insights that could immediately make you understand why this was important.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we step back a little bit and kind of say, let's talk about what this platform is and what it does for consumers, for research. Can we kind of take a high level on that, you guys?
Yeah, sure. So, and thanks, Brad. I appreciate there's a few of us. So, we like to talk. All of us like to talk. So
That's good. That's
you
awesome.
were-
You should have heard one. I had one the other night where it was like pulling teeth. So it's all good.
So the starting point to grasp is that everybody on the planet is going to get their genome sequenced in our lifetime, right? And when I say the planet, I largely mean, the Western world, but hopefully we can, decentralize healthcare and make it available to more people. And we can talk a bit more about that as we go on.
Sure.
But so I mentioned before, Aldo reiterated, this idea that your genome is very, very private information, or it should be. And now you're going to get it in a plain text file. And, if your child is born in North America with a rare disease, the insurance company will pay to get its genome sequenced, and you don't know where that data goes, right?
Right.
So it's very private, but also it's very, very valuable. And I think Aldo can touch on some of the money points of view on this. And so we want to join in the middle of primarily protect your genome, lock it in a vault, and then you can control access to it. So Apple has this idea about, their health kit. Eventually you're going to get your genome into your health kit. And we're saying you shouldn't be uploading your genome into an Apple, some Apple storage. What you should be doing is basically having it locked away, and then anybody can query it and ask to query it. And you get a notification on your phone that says, hey, GlaxoSmithKline would like to ask a question of your genome. They'll give you $100 for it. Do you accept? Yes or no? You can say no. You can say yes, depending on your own preferences. But that also scales itself up very well to, hey, you're in the doctor, and like Intern would say, you're in the medical center, and they're trying to work out in the future what dose of a drug you should get. You'll be able to query your genome, and it'll be, hey, Mark is trying to query your genome, grant access. And that's essentially a blockchain wallet. So the tokens are held there. And it's also this idea of, we don't own the data. We never see the data. The data, you swab a cheek, put it in it gets sequenced, that those cells get sequenced, they sequence the DNA, that gets dropped into a vault. You then have access to your vault. And the way we think about this is, not your keys, not your coins. Same thing. It's a wallet with a seed phrase, and not your keys, not your data. So that's the basic premise of it. Maybe Aldo, you can talk a little bit about how much the data is worth.
Yeah. So the data, I mean, the value of genomic data, I don't think we have yet grasped how valuable it is. And the reason for that is because previously the cost was mainly visible when it came to sequencing. As I said before, the first genome was sequenced in the year 2000, I believe. The cost of doing that was over $5 billion. Now you can do it just over $500. So there are lots of sequencers in the market. They make good money just from the sequencing. Now the cost of that is dropping. And already, kind of the leaders, sequencing leaders in the market, they've already announced that in a few years' time, they will be able to do it for a little over $100. And when I say sequencing, I mean sequencing on a clinical grade, something that we call whole genomic sequencing, which basically, as far as scientifically possible today, gives you all the data that is available about you. And I think that's a very important distinctive factor here that we need to raise. So that's basically what the sequencing is all about. The value.
Sorry, Aldo. There's a big difference between kind of what you would get from another service doing it versus what you're talking about with entire genetic sequencing, right?
Correct. So the direct to consumer genetic companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, they currently sequence something that we call your exome. So it's at a lower grade, so to say. It's not at a clinical grade, but still it's a grade good enough to kind of determine who you are, right? So it's still your DNA that we're dealing. It's still DNA that. So it's not completely, invaluable, but the clinical grade is will tell you the most about you and will unlock loads of things about you, which is basically what we want, because that's where, we're curious and, loads of people who want to work with us, they want to know loads of stuff about themselves.
Sure.
So that's basically the grade you need to go for. Now, in terms of the value, so when we're talking exome value alone, that we've mapped out from 2012 until today, we did that in a blog post, of what direct to consumer genetic companies, what they've made over the years in cross-selling genomic data to research organizations in the pharmaceutical industry. And so there are quite a few either commercial deals that were done of in the hundreds of millions. A couple of, notable mentioning is a deal that was done in 2018, whereby 23andMe sold 5 million exomes to GlaxoSmithKline for the lovely amount of $300 million, right? And that's just one of the many that we kind of saw. There's also, and I think Intern might want to talk about that kind of the acquisition of these companies, and I'll let Intern take that one. But I mean, just for you to see that it's not kind of we don't mean to be kind of the conspiracy theorist here of them potentially doing something with your data, or us looking into the future and say, oh, look what's happening. No, it is already happening. It's not it's not even a secret. It's already happening. They're already cross-selling your data, and they feel it's their full right to do so. And maybe if you look at all the paperwork and all the terms and conditions they thrown at you, that might add up for them. But out of principle and out of kind of educating the consumer and really trying to convey to the consumer what their DNA data is worth, we don't think that's the way to go, right? So that's where we come in.
So, I mean, I think obviously, and I don't think it's difficult for consumers to understand their data being sold, because I think they're so used to that being a part of their lives right now but I don't think they understand the full ramifications of that as it relates to genetic data, much less. Yeah. I mean, genetic data is much more impactful than what they're just used to selling the way Twitter or Facebook or whomever would sell it. But I think what's really interesting here is I've always been fascinated the business model of a 23andMe, right? Not only you're essentially paying them when you sign up, you're essentially paying them to make billions of dollars off of the data that you're giving to them. And yes, they give you some interesting tidbits about your health and your family and where you came from. And, we all came from here, and all of that is very fascinating. But at the end of the day, it's really from a business perspective, it's a really awesome business process that consumers are actually paying you to make billions of dollars from their data. So I think that's what we're getting at. And what you guys are saying is there's a much better way to do this, and we can put consumers in control of their data and let them earn money directly from the people who want access to it, as opposed to paying another corporation money to make money with your data and you have no idea how it's being used.
100%. Yeah. No.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just wanted to add a few things. That's what Aldo said. So Aldo may not be a conspiracy theorist, but maybe I am, and that's why I'm the.
It's appropriate, the Anon guy. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, as Aldo was saying, right? So 23andMe and Ancestry, they're sequencing your exome, so about 1 to 2% of your genome. And yeah, like you said, they're giving you some, cute little like, hey, your parents are from Poland, but you probably already knew your grandparents were from Poland. So, but there's still maybe some interesting things that they're telling you in these reports, but you're maybe not getting the full picture. And a question we always get in some of our AMAs is like, okay, that's cool. Like, why would I want my genome sequenced? Like, how does that help me? And I'll just like give you one example. When I worked in pharmacogenomics, when I worked at that it was that company, it was like more of a startup at that time. I was one of the junior members, and I would on like a Friday, right, we'd get some of the junior members and some of the other interns, we'd go head down to the lab and we'd be like, okay, hey, can you sequence our genome, right? So we'd take our cheek swabs, and then we'd give it to the folks in the lab and say, okay, sequence it, run it through the algorithms, and let's look at the results, right? And for one of the genes, it's called CYP, I think, yeah, I hope I'm not getting these two mixed up. It's CYP1A2, and that's the gene that codes for the proteins that metabolizes things like caffeine, right? Or stimulants. So just for reference, like stimulants, like, Coca-Cola, right? Caffeine, Coca-Cola, that's a stimulant. Cocaine is a stimulant. Speed, Adderall, Red Bull, they're all stimulants, but they're on a spectrum, right? And coffee as well. And one interesting thing about me is that my whole life, I always thought, okay, I can't have like a Coca-Cola after like noon. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep. I can't ever have a coffee. I can't have a Red Bull because I'm just so sensitive to caffeine. I just can't have it. The crazy thing that I learned when I sequenced my genome and I got the results was that I was what's called an ultra rapid metabolizer, meaning that my body burns through caffeine like crazy. It just burns through it, right? And I lived my whole life thinking, wow, I can't have coffee and caffeine, but my genetics said the exact opposite, right?
Amazing.
And you're going to have more stories like this as the cost of whole genome sequencing goes to zero, right? You're going to want to think, okay, well, I have my genome in my pocket, fully accessible. My doctor and I can look at it along with maybe a genetic counselor. Where are you going to want to store your genome? Are you going to want to store it in a Web2 company like a 23andMe, Ancestry, or another analog? Or are you going to want full custody of your genome? And then once you do have full custody, right, with GenomesDAO, you can choose if you want to make passive income from it. You can say, you know what, like this, if GlaxoSmithKline or this rare disease organization or whatever, they can learn something from looking at this tiny part of my genome, and it helps advance science, and I get paid for it. Why not? Right.
Right.
And if you're like, you know what, I don't want anyone looking at my genome because, for privacy reasons, then you have that option too. But I think it's about I think the whole point of Web3 is giving people control of their data, right?
Yeah.
And just full custody of what belongs to them. And this ranges all the way from things like Facebook, their Facebook behavioral data, to their genomic data, to other things. And like one other example I would just want to bring up is that I was listening to like 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, and the author of the book Sapiens came on and was speaking. And he said something really alarming. That was that these companies like Facebook and Instagram, they know so much about you just based on how you interact on their platform. They like they know more about you than you know about yourself. Like, for example, he mentioned that they know your sexual orientation even before you do.
Wow.
And that's like crazy. And what gets really scary is when you pair genomic data with this data, your behavioral data, and then you can create systems where, Mark Zuckerberg could be like, hey guys, like we have their genomes. Look at everyone who's predisposed to like anxiety. And then let's curate them things that will make them more anxious, right? Just get them super anxious. And then after that, let's sell them like an anti-anxiety drug, and they make money. So I mean, that's just a very like, surface level example, but like Aldo and Mark said, you have to have, there's some scary scenarios where someone else has control of your genome and they know everything about you. So
Yeah,
I'll stop there, but
no, that's awesome. And look, I think that's actually a really valid point, right? There are all kinds of uses, nefarious uses of your data that are already impacting society, right? We know that bots are ginning people up into a frenzy over political issues or whatever it may be. And we know that foreign governments are actually deploying some of those things. So we know that there's already the power to do that. When you combine this with genetic data that makes some things more verifiable or allows people to play on people in even worse ways, I think that's a really valid point. I don't think it's as much conspiracy theory as are they doing it now or when will they start? Right.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Exactly. And this is also because, we don't only want to be calling out kind of the current Web 2.0 players and basically say you're doing it all wrong. Yeah, and I think there are many of these companies, they started with the right intention in a certain way. The only
Right.
problem is it's just based on trust. Basically the data is centralized in a database, and that database can be acquired by you don't know who, right?
Right.
So the example, one example is Ancestry.com was acquired for 4.7 billion by Blackstone, which is one of the biggest private equity partners in, around. I know normally Intern uses this in the conspiracy theory. Sorry, now. But
Stole this conspiracy.
yeah, sorry, I stole you the conspiracy. But I like what Intern always says. That's not, they didn't pay 4.7 billion just to know more about your granddad, right?
Yeah.
They're after the data. And I think that's a big wake up call for all of us, that even though the people who initially get your data might not want to do any harm with it, there's no guarantee that, further down the line, that's not going to happen.
Right.
And specifically with your DNA, that is so important because your DNA will never change, right? If it's your phone number or if it's your home address, that might still change. Okay, it's annoying, but there's still ways to kind of,
Combat
that or work around that. With your DNA data, you can't really. That's the end of it. And I think that's just a very scary notion. And I think that's where trustless systems and why Web 3.0 is such a great solution for this.
Right. So, I mean, and that's exactly what I was about to say. It makes complete sense that this be decentralized and trustless, just like everything else in DeFi and crypto that we want to make decentralized and trustless, right? It should be under my control. So the big picture is this: you guys provide a kit for people to get a full clinical sequencing done of their DNA, and then that data is taken and loaded onto the blockchain. I assume in some encrypted format, because otherwise it would be available for anyone to see on the blockchain. And then there's an interface to that allows me to access that data and allow other people to access that data. Is that basically correct on the whole concept behind it?
Nearly exactly. One thing we get a lot is, you're putting DNA on the blockchain. That sounds expensive. These are 200 gigabyte files. Someone worked this out the other day. It cost you 65 ETH to get one of them onto the blockchain. But it's also, as you pointed out, the exact opposite of what we're trying to do, because we're saying it's private data, hide it away. You don't want that. So what it is we partnered with the big microprocessor company AMD. Cool. And they have some technology called AMD SEVES, which means secure encrypted vaults, basically. So when the file comes off the sequencing machine, it's dropped into this vault. And that vault is paired. You pair it with the Genomes app, which is on the App Store, which is a blockchain wallet. So that is the keys that controls access to the app,
okay,
to the vault. So with the blockchain, we do lots of things like audit logs. If you're a research group and you want to run some research on genomes, you can ask. So say you wanted to ask us if we've got our genomes in vaults and we don't know what percentage of the population expresses the 3 genes associated with long COVID, right? Nobody knows that today. They know there's 3 genes associated with long COVID, but they could ask us hey, Mark, Brad, Aldo, Intern, we'll give you $50 to ask that question. Do you express one of these 3 genes? That's all we'll ask. We don't get access to your data. The question goes, if you approve it, the question goes in and then comes out again with 1 yes, 2 no, 3 yes.
Right.
And so that is doable today. We have genomes in vaults. We have that already set up. And then scaling that up is where I think we can go next. And so there's the DeFi angle has really, what Aldo was saying before about how a lot of the terms, when we were going through the consensus incubator, we were in San Francisco hanging out with the Dharma folks, which is a DeFi protocol, a DeFi app that they had just come up with, 6 months previously, the term DeFi. So we weren't thinking we were going to add it. We thought we were going to add a tokenomics layer for get paid and then convert it out to fiat or what have you. Now, because of DeFi, it opens up this whole new world of get paid, and then I can stake my tokens and we'll pay you out more tokens. So we have Gene, which is the utility token, and we have Gnome, which is the governance token of the DAO. And so what we've set up, we went live with at the end of our public sale last week, is Gene ETH pools, and you earn Gnome ETH pools, and you earn Gene. So you are incentivized to stake and get more. And where this works out is, you can get to a point where you say, I'm going to get my genome sequence, and then I earn more Gene token, use that to pay for another kit, give it to my friend. They start earning passive income. They can give it to a friend. And so you can get these public goods from DeFi workflows, which is really interesting.
That's very interesting. And it's one of the things I talk about quite a bit, is this idea of creating not only public goods, but perpetual incomes for people that spur off of some of these projects. In terms of, okay, so you guys have this vault technology using from AMD. How does that get, I'm assuming there's an expense there, right? So how does the system pay for the expenses related to what you guys have to do to make sure this whole thing functions properly for people? How does that work out?
Yeah. So the plan is there that every query of every genome will take a tiny percentage.
Good.
And so we get paid that way. That's, which scales very well if you have, the predictions are that 1.25 billion people will have their genome sequenced by 2025. So, if we go after a 10% market share, that's a lot of genomes to be queried all the time, right? So it scales really, really well. And yeah, the storage is taken care of and the vaults are taken care of, but it also opens up ideas like, if you want to if you know how to code and you know something about genomics and you find something out in the literature, or you're a postdoc at, Stanford and you found something out, you could just write a little app and say, hey, do you know what? I'm going to charge 100 Gene for if you want to run this query, and you get your report back. You say workflow's the same. You click on the web app and you're like, I'll run that. Oh, it'll give me my cool data about X. I'll run that and I'll get my notification on my phone. Mark is trying to query your genome with this test. Do you want to approve it? Approve. And I'm paying to query my data, but the person who wrote that, there's a whole economy built on top of it.
That's awesome.
So, it scales to normal healthcare because there's so many processes right now that involve, okay, we think you've got this illness. What we're going to do is we're going to sequence your genome and then we're going to run this one algorithm on it. And that's very wasteful in terms of a cost of goods, right? If you get, a breast cancer scare, they'll do the BRCA1 test on it and they'll sequence your genome. And then if you came back 2 years later, I know in the UK, if this was the case, if you came back 2 years later with a different problem, they'd just sequence your genome again. A, you don't know where that data is going. B, it costs money to do this. So if you've just got it as the app layer, then you can run the algorithm for it's a lot more cost effective for the insurance companies, for the people who create the tests, for everyone involved. So that's where it's going to become a part of our day-to-day healthcare going forward.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aldo.
No, I think the part what Mark said is where we actually raise, genomic research every step of the way by big players as well as small players. We just want to be that infrastructure where people can go to query the data
Right.
And it's not all because, yes, there's the passive income, and would you say, perpetually making money off the data if it's being queried, but it's also closing the information loop. Because, often if it's used for research by, for instance, the British Heart Foundation, and it's kind of almost a charitable donation to kind of, for people to query your data, you should be able to. The only thing you would want out of that is kind of have some sense of how the data is being used, which you currently do not have, right?
Right.
So it's not only about the money, it's also about how are we dealing with such valuable information at this moment in time. And this is an example that I use in a market. Intern, I've heard this story many times, but when my wife was pregnant of our now 2-year-old daughter, we went to the hospital, and they were doing kind of this early test to see whether the child had certain syndromes and whether the baby was healthy. And for that, they needed to use the genome. And then the nurse asked me, "Do you want to give us the sequence? Do you want the DNA data? Do you want to give it to charity?" And she couldn't even tell me which charity. And of course, she didn't know I was involved with GenomesDAO. So I immediately said no. And she really looked at me. It's like, what kind of person are you? This is charity. We're doing hard work here. I said, like, well, first of all, you can't tell me even what the name of the charity is. You're just trying to think, like, because you say charity, that I just need to sign everything and wave the DNA data of my unborn daughter here. And second of all, I have no clue kind of in which database this goes or where this is going to end up in 20 years' time, right? And so who am I to already kind of make that decision for my daughter who isn't even here yet, right? So, but it's just a way that we think things work, and we just go. I'm sure many future parents went ahead with it. It's just, well, they don't know any better.
It's a brilliant model if you're a pharmaceutical company to say, hey, we're setting up this charity where we will donate sequence data to charities that are doing research on cancer or heart disease or whatever. But in the meantime, we're also using it for our own use, right? I mean, it's a brilliant model, really. And I'm sure the hospital gets a piece of the action too. So that's another.
I don't know. I said no, but I was just, I was mainly puzzled by the fact that she couldn't tell me which charity.
Right. Yeah, that's nuts.
Because it was such a standard. If you say charity in a hospital setting to people in white coats, it's like, they just don't hear no often, because you're just like, sure, charity, health, research, of course will help, but that's the critical thinking that we kind of need. And I don't blame anyone, because if there's no alternative, what do you expect people to choose for, right?
Yep.
But that's why we want to make so much noise. Like, we're here now, so you don't have to just accept this.
Yep. I think this is such an incredibly powerful concept, obviously. And I'm curious how, I don't know if this comes from independent developers or how this works, but how do you expand the query surface for researchers? And by that, I mean, it's one thing to say, I want to see, X component of genetic data from this number of people. Maybe I do it geographically. I can probably make that pretty easy, or I can do it by age. But how do you start surfacing other things of people, like specific diseases they have or specific tendencies they have, that you can surface anonymously and that users can actually supply to that search surface? Is that something you guys are having to think through, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's lots of things to think through on this level. I think one of the, and we know about where the weak spots are, and we're thinking about ways where you can get around the weak spots in a way that works for the normal person. We've had many octogenarian grandfather in our original users of the thing who are trying to explain a seed phrase to, and it's why do I need to remember this? And it's like, well, you won't have access to it afterwards. And it's like, well, no, you can grant me access to my data. And like, no, you don't have access to it. It's self-sovereign.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things happening in the space where we know we have to be working and moving things forward. One of those is, posting out the swabs to people and getting their address. Is there a way with, sign in with your Ethereum and then, sign in with your MetaMask and then get it delivered to a post box? We don't need to know who you are. So then at that point, if you're anonymous, there is that, how do we expose information in a way that retains anonymity? So you can report that you have, say, illness X. Like, I'm a carrier for something called Zellweger disease, and I don't mind people knowing that because I'm the test dummy for our platform. And so all of our developers provide genome. I think the ship has sailed. But the way in which you want to grant access to different people, we're starting with the most secure. Remember what I said about like Akion saying, so Consensus Incubator saying, if you're a data privacy company, get your data privacy setup set first. And hence, by the time we came to do the tokenomics, we could do so much more because of DeFi workflows and DeFi protocols.
Sure.
But fundamentally, we need to know that the interesting caveat here as well is 96% of the publicly available genomic data is Western European or North American, so largely white. There's regional differences in people's genomes. We see this we're working with the Armenian Genome Project, where there's a high population, a percentage population of something called Mediterranean familial disease. So they want to research that specifically. So we're working with national organizations on this. But I think what we can do as well is, again, blockchain. So you can have cool multi-sig setups where you say, hey, there's an education gap. We'll say Brad knows what he's talking about when it comes to genomics. So us three, if we're all in the same family, we're going to trust you, Brad, to make decisions about our data. So we could have them all in the same vault. We could have you signing on behalf of us. And where this scales up really well is rare disease charities, rare disease organizations, people who are looking for a cure, who want to give away their DNA to get a treatment. And then on the other side, rare disease pharmaceutical companies who want to give them a cure because they can then make money off them for the rest of their life. Sure. So we just can broker that in a secure way. And then you can have, again, more interesting things where we're talking with some folks already and they're saying, I don't care about the money. So if that rare disease pharmaceutical company is going to pay, then they can just pay to the charity. They can just pay to the people who are helping us, right? So all of the money is funneled one way and all of the queries are approved by a certain individual.
That makes sense. And I will say, I mean, most of my healthcare is provided locally by one company, right? One health system company. And I have a portal where I can go in and see my examination results, any diagnoses, whatever. So I envision that eventually you guys will have the ability to connect to healthcare systems and be able to let people release that data out to your system, anonymized, but attached to the genetic data. That way, then when a pharmaceutical company comes in and says, we think X, so we want to find people that have this, and these genetics, right? You'll be able to provide those kinds of searches as well for them, I assume. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head there. And it's just a question of how fast can we move and how fast we can scale up in different areas and different countries and things. Because as I said, if you're a developer in the GenomesDAO, it's quite a lot of stuff you're in the middle of a Venn diagram of, and encryption over here, genomics over here. So it's quite a lot to get your head around. And so the technology could work for any medical data. The reason why we focused on genomics in the first instances is it's such a big problem and such a highly valuable asset. And then we can just focus on creating the pipes to query that data in one way. Then if we want to scale it up to more to add in different or partner with different DAOs or partner with different organizations, 100%. That makes as you seem to already know, that makes the data infinitely more valuable to the pharmacist.
That's awesome. One of the things you mentioned earlier is decentralized healthcare. And I think during COVID, that became still in COVID, but you know what I mean? During COVID, that became something that people became more aware of as a possibility, right? The idea that independent researchers, independent people could be collating data, could be doing research separately from government entities or large healthcare companies or whatever. Obviously, this model, what you guys are building, could be a huge component of that kind of a decentralized system whereby independent researchers can have access to the same levels of data and information that only the biggest pharmaceutical companies have, right? So I think probably some of the benefits of that is, number one, we reduce overall research costs. We actually get more brains studying things that gatekeepers at other companies can't get to. But are there other things that you guys have really thought about over the last few years that you see potentially happening with decentralized health that you can be a part of?
Yeah, I think one of the really valuable side effects of the platform we've built is twofold when it comes to consent. So this is a repeat consent model. The same people can come back and ask more questions of you. And so it is asking for repeat consent. And I don't think repeat consent models exist in many places. We went over to Genomics Medicine Ireland and they had some law changes where they're sequencing 60,000, they're a private company sequencing 60,000 genomes a year, which is the birth rate of Ireland. And they sit parallel to the public health system. And there was concerns about privacy. So they had to change their legal terms, things like this. But everyone they'd already sequenced had just signed the generic legal terms. So they had no way of going back to them and asking, hey, we're not doing anything bad. We just, can we change the way in which we have legal rights to do things? And so I think that repeat consent protocols is an interesting one, but also the ability to have anonymous, auditable consent. So if you're one of those independent researchers and you're writing an academic paper and you say, I asked this person, I got consent from a person who does exist, they approved it, and we have a proof of computation and it's on the blockchain, then you have proof of consent in an anonymous way, which really helps speed up research as well.
No, that makes total sense. They've got to have the veracity of the data that they have be proven for people to actually take the research they're doing seriously. So that's awesome. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to add to that is that I think for a lot of, as you kind of mentioned, right, this idea of decentralized healthcare, I think with our model, it kind of creates the ability to think of something like fair trade, like chocolate bars, right? If you see that fair trade logo, that that, I can't say I'm an expert on the topic, but that these cocoa beans were sourced sustainably and no one, was exploited in the process. And I think as we're transitioning to a Web3 world, people are going to want to see like, okay, this data, like, was it sustainably harvested data, right? Did people get compensated for their data in a fair way? Or did they get, screwed over? Did they get rugged by like 23andMe Ancestry? Like, is it black market data or is it like clean data?
That's awesome.
Right. And I think one, like, the DAO is still forming, we're still getting things together. But I think one kind of vision for this is, think of like a Uniswap or a SushiSwap, right? If you have an obscure coin that's not listed on Coinbase, you go to those dexes to get it. But nothing really exists for healthcare data, right? So that's kind of where we're posturing the project to be, but for more niche things like genomic data, because that's one of probably the best use cases for this model.
I love the idea of forcing the veracity of the data because of the research being done around it, having to have a stamp of this is legitimately something that somebody said they could utilize, right? Because then I think you kind of reset the whole game, right? You reset all of the data that's gotten out into the wild previously, that's probably being reused over and over again and isn't vaulted by these companies. You're now resetting the whole switch on, is this legit research or not? Because we don't even know where this original data came from.
Exactly. And that's already a concern. So, there are two cases I could mention here. One is already that in the state of California, already government regulations are being enforced, upon direct to consumer genetic companies like 23andMe, all having to do with the privacy and security of the data. So already kind of on a, by law, these companies are not just able to do whatever they want with the data, right? They got away with it for far too long. And we're happy that, litigation is now also catching up with it. Like, well, hold on, there needs to be the veracity of the data, or you need to be able to prove that, the consumer was actually okay with this.
Right.
Another scary scenario on that level just was in the UK. There was the Telegraph who did research of what, all having to do with COVID. There was a preferred partner of the government, a company that took all PCR tests for, among people, see, of course, whether they had COVID, yes. Now the Telegraph was in research because they had caught wind of the fact that this company was trying to cross-sell the data the COVID data to the pharmaceutical.
Wow.
So the DNA data.
Genomic data, not just
Oh, so they were taking the swab for the PCR and then going ahead and taking the genomic data and selling that genomic data.
That's what they're under investigation for right now. This came out last week. Like,
wow,
the stories write themselves when we say, is it happening now or is it going to happen?
Yeah.
You know,
again, we're not the conspiracy theorists, but there not a week goes by.
you don't have to be.
Whereby you hear some of these stories that are like, because these people know they've got their hands on the data and that the data is valuable. So the temptation is just far too big for these organizations to say, no, hey, let's see if we could do this or see if we could do that. Of course, it's unethical, and but again, it's based on trust that you have in these companies. And no, we won't do anything with the data. It's like, yeah, well, how do you know?
Right. In terms of the things that catch consumers' interests, like the little fun things that you find out on 23andMe and the health things, do you guys envision that developers will be creating tools for people to make it easy to get the kind of information and knowledge that they find interesting? For example, I've been terrified of heights my entire life, and I found out through a company like that that's actually a genetic issue with how my eyes balance my body when I'm up on a high place. I think those are actually some of the things that are not necessarily very serious, but actually are the kinds of things that drive consumers to utilize this. Is that something you guys are thinking about apps developers building, or how are you approaching that?
yeah. So I think there's three layers to that, which is there's going to be an open API. People can build their own apps, but we're also going to build apps, right? Because we want it to be valuable. We want to have that, at least that B2C. So we've already got carrier status and ancestry that you can run your team through us already. And then we're going to add in a whole bunch of those. And then we're going to have a vetted app store, because we need to make sure that, I'm just running a query to tell you if you're scared of heights. You're like, hold on a minute. But we're also making sure that people are not giving away too much information in one query. So 100% we see an ecosystem there, just like the App Store. That goes a level higher with these companies, like the people who are getting there's 70,000 women in North America who've had the genomic tests through a company for the algorithm for BRCA1, BRCA2, highlights up to a 12% chance of developing breast cancer. And so that is an expensive test. And as I mentioned before, the cost of goods. So they could bring down their costs while increasing their profit margins. And the insurance companies would be happy to pay it because it's less cost, right? So
Makes a lot of sense.
There's the corporate side of how this is useful and where we can open it up to. And then there's the third layer, which is the working with pharmaceutical companies to make sure that they're writing the right queries, or rare disease organizations to work within their organization.
Very cool. All right. So we're about an hour in, but I real quickly wanted to ask you, can you give us an overview of where you guys are with the project right now? Right. As a consumer, can I come in and supply you with information and get my data back, or a sample and get my data back? And then how can people start getting involved in the project, the DAO? What are you guys looking for? Because I think this is really fascinating from the perspective of there's an opportunity for income and revenue. There's an opportunity to learn more about yourself, and there's an opportunity to start getting engaged in a project that has a public good, a public service element to it that's really strong. So, and I also think that a lot of what you're going to get in user base is word of mouth, right? Is the incentives you were talking about earlier about people who are staking and earning, and they hand off a kit to a friend or whatever. So can you give me that overview?
Yeah, so I can start and the guys can maybe fill in if I miss anything. But so yeah, the DAO is rolling out. We're going to set up our own, all of the DAO infrastructure on the DAO side of things, and snapshot voting and things like that. We have our first kickoff call on Thursday at 12:30 Eastern time. So
nice.
If you're interested in joining in, if you go to discord.gg/genomes, GENOMES, you can join the Discord and look for us three, and we'll be happy to shout about it. We are building up the team, and we're scaling up in terms of bounties and, things like you were talking about for can other people write queries. So we're scaling up the team, and in going into 2022, we'll be looking for people who can help scale up the business operation side of things. If you know have been selling to pharmaceutical companies in the past, come see us in our Discord. And the other thing we have going is we have an NFT project that's going to come out in January with genomic sequencing kits attached to it. So you get a package, which is you get the genome sequence kit, you get the NFT, and you get random allocations of gene and gnome dropped onto your cards as well. So you can become a member of the DAO that way. If you want to stake, go to staking.genomesDAO. If you want to get your hands on some gene or some gnome, Sushi Swap is the only place you can get it right now.
That's where you did the public sale?
We did the public sale through that, hence we're hiring.
Awesome.
And yeah, we have two pools: the Gene ETH, Gnome ETH. If you buy it, you can buy that. And if you provide liquidity, you can make 3-digit APY right now. Has been
Nice, very nice. Well, they can do a public good and make good APY. I love it.
Yeah. And sorry, one thing I just wanted to add about public goods, because I think a lot of people will think this is interesting. One thing we're planning on doing is, I think with a lot of NFT projects, we've seen that a portion of the NFT sales, say so, like a famous artist, they drop their NFT project and they raise like 1,000 ETH or something. And then they'll usually say, okay, we're going to allocate 10% to like this charity, like the American Cancer Society or something like that, right? But what we're trying to do from our end, from the public goods perspective, is we're trying to combine genomics, DeFi, crypto into a UBI type thing. And you mentioned this earlier in your show, but I just wanted to kind of clarify this a little bit. What we're planning on doing is hopefully partnering with different artists, and then from their sale, we won't actually take an allocation of their ETH, but we would ask them, would you be willing to donate the yield, right? So say you have an artist and they raise, 1,000 ETH. We would say, hey, would you be willing to put in like 100 ETH into a DeFi protocol like Alchemix or something like that? And then the yield from that, you would give to us. And then what we would do with the yield is we would pass that yield off to individuals in underserved countries that would not be able to afford the $500, around $500 to sequence their genome. And then once they've gotten their genome sequenced, it's kind of that idea of, if you donate to charity once, you give a man a fish, feed him for a day. In our case, we're giving the man the fishing pole so they can keep fishing, right? And the idea is that once you provide them with this, I don't know if it's best to call it infrastructure or their ability to make passive income from something that they own, it's recursive, right? So like if someone, in maybe Venezuela would get something like this, this is just an example, not that we have any contacts in Venezuela yet, but if they get like $50 from someone just looking into their genome, right, in a safe, secure, private way, that's a huge deal. Like,
Yeah.
Or even like $100 in other parts of the world. So that's what we're trying to do from the public goods perspective, is utilizing DeFi protocols, the yields from those, to give individuals the ability to make UBI, right?
Awesome.
And I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it's looking at all the data that we own, right? Behavioral data from Facebook, our genomic data, maybe financial data, other things, and then have people monetize that in a safe and private way where they have full custody. So that's one of the exciting things that we're doing that we're going to be hopefully, pioneering in 2022 in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
That's a very powerful model. I love the unique idea of rather than taking from the artist what they've earned, asking them to stake it and then allocate the yield, because they still get what they had in the first place.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. That's really cool.
And I think a lot of artists would be willing to do that. It's not saying, hey, give us 10% of your ETH. It's just saying, hey, you're probably not going to spend all this ETH anyway. Just lock it into a vault, maybe for 8 months or something. And if you could give the yield, and this yield could actually, give someone UBI, hopefully indefinitely. Yeah. And that's kind of the model we're trying to build out, over the next few months.
Love that concept. I think that's fantastic. And I think that's yet another thing about this project that'll drive people to it. The cool thing about it is there are so many things for different people with different personalities to latch onto, the fear of data sales and privacy, the issues with health, the decentralization of healthcare, the ability to earn money, I think there are so many different doing public goods, public service, research, pharmaceutical development. I think there are so many really positive attributes to this thing that I'm really hopeful that this community, the DeFi community, will latch onto it. And then in general, you guys are able to penetrate beyond that. So looking forward to seeing what happens next. Guys,
Thank you.
thanks so much for coming on. Is there anything else everybody should know before we cut away?
I think we've given you everything, Brad, but come
Awesome,
find us
man.
on Twitter, come find us on the Discord. Thank you so much. For having me.
Perfect.
Just a big thank you, Brad, to you for having us on your show and letting us yabble on.
Oh no, this is, I could do this for another 2 hours.
Thank you
guys.
so much.
You're lucky you had a time block, because we could go for a long time here, because there's 400 other scenarios I want to go through. Guys, thank you so much. I'm excited for what you're doing, and I'm going to talk about you tomorrow on the show as well, my noon show. But thanks so much for your time.